Hello, viewers. I want to welcome you once again to our series of presentations on the Alpha and Omega of apostasy. And today our episode is part 8, which deals with religious liberty and Sunday law. In fact, when we read in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, chapter 7:12 and verse 17, which says, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." You see, in the great war of the devil and God's people, there are so many things that are at stake. And for us to survive the coming tempest, we must have a correct religious faith, and which involves the actual presence of Christ living in the earth by faith. As we read in Colossians chapter 1, verse 27, Christ in you, the hope of glory. When Ellen White saw the 1888 message, in fact, he saw the 1888 message as the third angel's message in verity, new light, a message which is present truth for this time, light from heaven, the light which is to lighten the earth with his glory. It was not only that Jesus burdened sin, he saves from its power and slavery even now. So this message that came to God's people in that specific year, 1888, the message that was to move thousands, but unfortunately, a message that was rejected. In fact, in 1888, as I hinted previously, Senator Blair of New Hampshire introduced a bill for the observance of the Lord's Day in the US Senate. And for Adventists who have been studying prophecy, it was like a sign of the end of the world. You see, after the message had been rejected, the very message of God had been rejected by his people in 1888, Ellen White had right. I was confirmed in all I had stated in Minneapolis, that a reformation must go through the churches. Reforms must be made, for spiritual weakness and blindness were upon the people who had been blessed with great light and precious opportunities and privileges. As reformers, they had come out of the denominational churches, but they now act a part similar to that which the churches acted. We hoped that there will not be the necessity for another coming out. While we endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace, we will not with pen or voice cease to protest against bigotry. Well, viewers, the second angel's message was fulfilled when thousands of people left their churches in 1844 to join the Advent movement. In fact, according to the testimony of the Spirit of Prophecy, about 50,000 withdrew from the churches. And this is what became the present-day Advent movement, or the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But when we go back to the issue of 1888, shortly after the presentation of the message of righteousness by faith, in 1892, the prophet of the Lord, or the messenger of the Lord, penned down these words: "The time of test is just upon us, for the loud cry of the third angel has already begun in the revelation of the righteousness of Christ, the sin-burdening Redeemer. This is the beginning of the light of the angel, whose glory shall fill the whole earth." So the presentation of the messages of righteousness by faith, if they were well received at that time, then it could have meant that the Sunday law could have been passed, because God's people could have been purified by these messages. In fact, it's interesting to note a speech given by one of the politicians of our time, Michael Gorbachev. He said, "Gentlemen, comrades, do not be concerned about all you hear about the glasnost and the perestroika and democracy in the coming years. They are primarily for outward consumption. There will be no significant internal changes in the Soviet Union other than for cosmetic purposes. Our purpose is to disarm the Americans and let them fall asleep." So what was Gorbachev telling his comrades? That they were deceiving the Americans by using the words democracy. In fact, they were only for outward consumption. It is at this point that now we ask ourselves this important question: is it the same with religious liberty? Is the crusade for religious liberty meant for outward consumption, as well as Michael Gorbachev intimates? Or again, we ask, is the purpose of church leadership to disarm faithful Adventists and let them fall asleep when they carry out the religious liberty programs in the church, mission programs abroad? Is it just to disarm God's people that they may not know of what is coming? In fact, in our time, around 1902, when the Religious Liberty Department was organized in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, with Alan Moon as the first chairman or director, already the prophet of the Lord had been exiled to Australia and had come back. So when this department was organized, there is none, again I repeat, there is none who has served in this department since that time who represents God's people or who represents God's interests. Now, let me show you just a short roster of the departmental directors of religious liberty over time. In 1902, we had Alan Moon. In 1905, we had Casey Russell. In 1913, we had Charles Longacre. In 1926, we had Herbert Photo. And in 1950, we had Alvin Johnson. Again, in 1959, we had Arthur Buckwalter. Thereafter, we had Melvin Adams. And thereafter, we had Bart Beverly Beach. Then we had John Grass. And today, we have Ganaun Diop from Senegal. You see, all these people who have served in the Department of Religious Liberty had nothing to do with religious liberty, but so much to do with ecumenism. And that department could probably be renamed as the Department of Ecumenism instead of the Department of Religious Liberty. In fact, one of the professors or philosophers of the Adventist Church who has succeeded to a large extent in deceiving faithful members. And as a result of his work, a movement has come in our time that has distorted doctrine, is Charles Longacre, none other than Charles Longacre. And in one of the documents that I took from the Advent website, he writes, "Why I am not a Roman Catholic." This is what he says on that document. Why I am not a Roman Catholic. This is what he said. He said that he has no spirit of animosity toward Roman Catholics, adding that he has the kindliest feelings for them. And to make matters worse, he intimated to us that many of his most intimate friends and associate workers in laudable enterprises are Roman Catholics. Who was Charles Longacre? A faithful and dedicated Roman Catholic whose marriage was solemnized by none other than Uriah Smith. So it's because of the work of these people who have come to deceive God's people and deny them the privilege of obtaining the righteousness that we read about in the book of Romans, in the book of Ephesians, in the book of Colossians, and other important epistles that we find in the writings of sacred scripture. And Ellen White had to say, there is now need of honest working men and women who will seek for the salvation of souls. For Satan is a powerful general, has taken the field, and in this last remnant of time, he is working through all conceivable methods to close the door against the light that God will have come to his people. He is sweeping the whole world into his ranks, and the few who are faithful to God's requirements are the only ones who can ever withstand him. And even this he is trying to overcome. What is Satan doing in our time? He has trained his agents. They have become messengers and servants of righteousness. Yes, they appear to be, but they are not. They are not actually servants or messengers of righteousness, but serving another power. In fact, it is for this reason that ever since the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, God's purpose has been to restore man into his own image. And at one point in 1888, God sought to finish his work that he may take his people to heaven, but his people were not ready. And as I hinted in my previous episode, is that God allowed the church to wander in the wilderness for another 40 or symbolic 40 years. So in this time of wilderness wandering, an image of the beast has been developed. And many of those who work in the department of religious liberty or public affairs and religious liberty, such as Ganon Diop, are not servants of the remnant church. They are actually servants of the man of sin involved in the effort to bring the whole world under the power of Rome. In fact, you could see this same man getting involved in the movement for climate change, behind which is hidden a false agenda, an agenda for the persecution of the people of God, just as it happened during the time of the Dark Ages. So the Inquisition, the traveling court of Rome, that persecuted thousands during that time, is going to be resurrected, not by Rome now, but by the image of the beast, by the very agents who are working undercover in the churches in which they have been sent to bring all systems back to Rome. You see, folks, we are living in a serious time in the history of the world. For in this age, Antichrist will appear as the true Christ. And then the law of God will be fully made void in the nations of our world. And the rebellion against God's holy law will be fully right. Yes, we are seeing it even in our own time. But the true leader of all this rebellion is none other than Satan, who is now clothed as an angel of light, who is now coming as a preacher of righteousness in the churches, a preacher of prophecy in the churches. But he is the same Satan who fell in the beginning. And the fact that he is clothed as an angel of light, he has more power to deceive and ensnare, because the SOP reveals to us that men will be deceived and they will exalt him to the place of God and deify him. In fact, the same devil who fell in the beginning is the one working among God's people to destroy them. And writing in that book, Testimonies to Ministers and Gospel Workers, which I have just been quoting, she proceeded, but omnipotence will interpose, and the apostate churches that unite in the exaltation of Satan, the sentence will go forth. There shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord who judged her. That is according to testimonies to ministers and the gospel workers taken from other writings of Ellen G. White. So, dear folks, in our time, there are very people who are sitting in the seats of authority, whom we trust as God's people, are already united, and they are working secretly to bring to fruition the great prophecies that we have been studying in the book of Revelation chapter 13. So Revelation chapter 13 will be fulfilled before our own eyes, because way back in 1888, we had men who were opposing the work of God. We had people like J.H. Morrison. We had people like Henry Nicola, all these men from Iowa in the United States of America. We had men like George Butler, men who opposed the work of God, men who opposed the giving of the messages of righteousness by faith, but who exercised their authority in their time to stop the progress of the work of God. If they succeeded in that time, I am asking, if they did indeed succeed in their own time, when the church had not grown much, or the power of Rome had not been fully consolidated in the Advent system, how much more can they succeed in our own time? How much more can they succeed in our own time? Yes, they will succeed to a large extent, because even so, Ellen White said in Life Sketches, page 196, in reviewing our past history, having traveled over every step of advance to our present standing, I can say, praise God. As I see what the Lord has wrought, I am filled with astonishment and with confidence in Christ as leader. We have nothing to fear for the future. We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and his teaching in our past history. Why do we read these things? Why do we get such a kind of assurance? We get this kind of assurance because we are living in a serious time when trouble is coming upon God's people. There are no watchmen to warn them of approaching danger. And those who were supposed to be watchmen, who could have warned God's people of the approaching danger, are working in cahoots with the enemy to resuscitate the power and the engine that Rome used, the engine of the Inquisition. So many people, as I have already mentioned, who are involved in the work of religious liberty, or who pretend to be involved in the work of religious liberty, or even of warning God's people about the approaching danger, they are themselves approached. They are fully involved in the work of persecuting God's people and preparing them for perdition. Therefore, we have to agree that we are living in serious times. The Sunday law is coming so soon. But before the Sunday law comes upon God's people, something significant has got to happen. What is this that is going to happen before the Sunday law comes? God must have a people who are purified. God must have a people who have subscribed to the right doctrines. God must have a people who have not been deceived by such philosophers as Charles Longacre, who have developed theories that have swept the masses of God's people who are seeking for and obtain the truth for this time. So the work that the devil started in Eden, the work that the enemy started way back in Eden that involved our first parents, is the work that he will continue to do till the end of time. And the country of the United States of America, which was a beacon of progress and freedom, where God allowed the church to flourish for many years, this land will throw the mighty Constitution to the dustbin. The Constitution which provides that Congress or Parliament shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That the government of the United States has no business in the beliefs of its people, but that he has got that system of government has got to sustain all, to protect all. Now the question is, will it continue to protect all till the close of time? No, it will not, because if that system has formed an image of the beast, how can that system warn the world of what the world is doing now? How can it warn God's people about the new world order? And no wonder God's people now are very ignorant of the movement of climate change, of the movement under COVID-19, of the many movements that will come to deceive God's children and mark and prepare them for destruction. This is a time that God's people have got to be ready and to defend religious liberty, just as the reformers of the 16th century worked to defend the Bible truth. We need such a kind of people in our time, people who will defend the things of God, people who will defend the gospel, people who will defend the truths that have come upon us by the pioneers of old. Because the pioneers of old, when they came together, they studied the Bible, they understood Bible truth, they went to proclaim these truths to the world. And we, if we have any hope of completing the work that the pioneers started, if we have any hope of defending religious liberty, just as the reformers did, then we have to go back to the Bible. We have to go back to the spirit of prophecy. We have to understand the messages for this time. What is God preparing his people to do during our time before we come to the end of time? Brethren, it's a serious time in which we are living. A time we need to prepare ourselves. A time we need to heed the warning of the servant of the Lord. A time that we need to prepare for eternity. And support this channel by all means, that the messages that are coming out of this channel may reach thousands, yeah, even millions all over the world, and God's people may become ready for the coming storm, so that when the time comes for them to defend the truth under persecution, they will be triumphant at last, and we will see them on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Welcome.